Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I'm really delighted for all the listeners and viewers out there. Jodi Norgaard, coming from Chicago area, and she's an entrepreneur activist. She wrote the book More Than a Doll: How Creating a Sports Doll Turned into a Fight to End Gender Stereotypes. And I'm really happy to have her on to discuss the issues she highlighted in the book, as well as showcase her for the listeners and viewers out there. So, Jodi, welcome.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, so I am, like you said, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an author, I'm an activist, I'm a public speaker. I speak on the importance of gender equality, and I kind of hit this space unintentionally. It was about 20 years ago when my daughter was 9 years old. And I was noticing the discrepancies in the products marketed to boys at that time and the products marketed to girls. I have two boys that are on either side of her. And I started to notice that the products marketed to boys were associated with violence and aggression. And then the products marketed to girls were associated with appearance and attractiveness. And I kept seeing this over and over and over. And I didn't want my boys to be violent or aggressive, obviously. Nobody does, and they weren't. So I didn't want to encourage this. And my daughter was always super smart and had so many interests. I didn't want her to feel that she felt this need to conform to a way a girl should look, right? And so there was a tipping point for me in the toy aisle at a toy store. So my daughter, do you have kids?
Yes, we have two kids, a 10-year-old and 4-year-old.
Okay. All right. So you will understand this moment. So you're running into the toy store, right? Because you need a wrap gift for birthday party they're attending in 30 minutes, right? Like one of those panicky parenting moments. And she had just gotten done playing soccer. And so she looked like a normal kid on a Saturday afternoon when I was frantically going up and down these aisles when I saw a line of dolls that just stopped me in my tracks. They had on short skirts, crop top, belly button ring, big hair, lots of makeup. I look at my daughter, I look at these dolls, and I pick up one of the dolls, and the name on the hang tag was Lovely Lola. And at that moment, I knew there wasn't one parent out there that wanted their daughter to look, act, or be called Lovely Lola. So I started picking up the other dolls in the line. And there was Dazzle and Destiny and Sizzle and Sue and Cute Candy. And I'm just like, I'm done. I'm done. And I realized I bought the doll and I brought it home to my husband and I said, listen, I think I can create a positive image doll that encourages girls to be healthy physically, mentally, and emotionally through sports and physical activity. So that's what led me on my path, and that's where I went. That's what started it all. Was an idea in the toy store. So it wasn't a glamorous place. It was just sick and tired, and I saw a need for change.
Interesting. And so, given that, when you talk to, or when it sounds like you are the product and the service when, because you do a lot of speaking in your book. When people come to you, what is their biggest fear, frustration? What are they running away from, towards, or what are they fed up with to come and work with you?
Well, it depends. There are two types of people there are a lot of people that are fed up with inequality that want to work with me. So I worked with the Obama administration and the Biden administration and their gender policy council. But there are also entrepreneurs that'll come to me. I found it really very, very interesting. I just did some guest lecturing at Indiana University at their Kelley School of Business. And when I was lecturing to their master's program in entrepreneurship, it was a group about 30, people from all over the world. And they were telling me their idea. And I would say out of the 30, 25 had ideas that have a socially responsible idea that they're combining with business, right? So it's that, we're going to make money, but yes, we're also going to provide a good service to the world. We're going to better humanity, society somehow. I just found it so refreshing and so like, wow, okay, this is something that is, I'm finding that is very interesting. How people are looking at business and, capitalism. We live in a capitalistic society. We have to acknowledge that. We have to make money. But how are we going to do that to make it better for our world? So I'm very hopeful with this next generation. I think we may see a new stream of entrepreneurship entering our culture.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, and so my follow-up question is because you talked about playing the long game, persistence, and just beating all the odds. And now, you after Biden, after kind of the elimination of DEI, it's kind of the odds are even more stacked against you. So, what is your sense of to keep going? Because it sounds like everybody, it kind of we had a far left, now we're kind of shifting back to the right. How do you plan to keep going after all of these additional roadblocks?
Well, that's a really good question because I do feel, Christopher, that we were making really good progress. And when I was working and collaborating with the Gender Policy Council, they were doing amazing things, not just for, people in the United States, but in our world. And, that is gone now. There are many roadblocks that have been set up, but we cannot sit. We cannot go on the sidelines. We cannot stay silent. So I have found in my journey and in my career, there have been so many times that I've had to dig deeper and to find that strength to keep going. Right? It's like I also look at it as I'm climbing a really big 14er. Right? Like I am just, and there are just so many false peaks, and I'm just keep going and keep going. I've got to find that endurance, and I think for all of us who are striving to make our world a better place, who are striving to, work towards equality, I think we need to dig deep and really find where we can find that courage and that strength and then step over the fear and not sit on the sidelines and to use our voice and to keep talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We cannot stop talking about it. You can obviously see that I'm passionate about this. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and like I said, it's kind of like our country has never been so divided because, there's people that are, in your camp and there's people on the opposite end. And so, More Than a Doll isn't just a memoir, it's a blueprint for grit, purpose-driven entrepreneurship. So kind of I think the listeners and viewers can get a sense of why you wrote that. What are the key themes or concepts that are talked about in the book?
Well, some of the key concepts would be, the need for persistence. So on my journey, I really realized that it was a lot about persistence, determination, which was fueled by passion. Just in my journey, just kind of learning as I'm going along because I knew nothing about the toy industry and I knew nothing about social change. So I kind of was learning about both as I was going along. But I think one of the biggest things that I found is that, you know, challenging the status quo, that is hard, right? Mainstream ideas never create change, and I was creating change. So it's, a lot of times in life, it's just easier to go on the path that has always worked, right? But we don't see progress that way. It's what Adam Grant calls, like for me, my idea was called he calls it a vuja day. Obviously it's a twist on deja vu, right? So it's a vuja day. I saw something that looked normal, a doll, right? A doll. Everybody knows what a doll is. I took that doll and I put a twist on it and I made it different. And I made it just that much different that would appeal to a different crowd. So it is a business blueprint. It is a book about determination. It is a book about social change.
Mhm.
So even when my publisher said, because they always want you just to pick three categories of where you fit, I'm like, I fit into a lot of different categories. I am definitely a business book. I am definitely a social change book. But this book could be for anybody from high school on up to, grandparent age. So it truly is a book for men and women of all ages.
Hmm. Interesting. And I know because your work's been featured on Today's Show, Forbes, New York Times. The other question I have for you is, what are some of the critiques that you've encountered either through writing or advocating for this particular position?
Well, I haven't, since my book has been launched, it launched in January, so it's very new. I really, knock on wood, haven't had many critiques on it. I've had a lot of positive feedback, which has been great. But in my business, like creating a doll that wasn't like it wasn't on the market, right? A sports doll, a soccer girl, a tennis girl, you name it, gymnastics, dance, whatever, that wasn't on the market, right? So buyers would say to me, I love your product. And my daughter plays soccer and she would love Soccer Girl. But ultimately, it'll never sell because ultimately, girls like fashion. Can you create a fashion doll? I'm like, that's my point, right? I had done my homework and there were 72 lines of fashion dolls out there. There were baby dolls, there were rag dolls, and then there are fashion dolls, and 72 lines of fashion dolls. And the buyers would say, well, for some reason, girls always gravitate towards fashion. And it's just like, well, if that's all you offer them, of course they're only going to buy the fashion dolls because there's nothing else on the market. So that's when I knew I was filling a void. I was filling a need. And I knew that parents wanted more for their girls too. And that, I had a pulse on what our culture wanted. But the buyers were my gatekeepers. It was really, really difficult, you know. So girls like more than fashion. It just doesn't define a young girl or a
Mm,
woman at all. Don't get
yeah.
me wrong. I like my fashion, but it's not something that defines me.
Interesting. The other question I have for you is you read about the connection between childhood play and adult opportunity, and why is it so critical that we pay attention to toys media,
Mm.
messaging aimed at kids, especially girls, and talk about solutions?
Yeah, so that is really interesting. By the age, so these stereotypes set in by the age of 5. And by when kids leave preschool, girls start believing that their gender can't do as much. Their gender isn't as smart as the male gender, which is just unfortunate, right? Because if we were to view the world equally through men and women of all genders, we would have greater balance. But as we know right now, this balance is completely off and there is absolutely no balance. So, for instance, if a young boy is empathetic and nurturing and caring, right, we should embrace that instead of saying, you need to be more aggressive, you need to be, more, toughen up, boys don't cry. And then the young girls who are very ambitious and aggressive, that's looked upon negatively, because girls should be that nurturing, sweet, on the sidelines kid, right?
Mhm.
So Warren Buffett once said, and this is one of my favorite quotes. He said, look at what our country has accomplished using half its talent, and imagine what we could accomplish if we pulled women off the sidelines. So when I look at sports and physical activity for girls and encouraging girls to be in sports, and what I learned when I was younger too is that leadership skills and men, and it's not just sports. I mean, I could go into this, but I truly believe, in embracing every child's, needs and desires, whether it's music or sports or cooking or, whatever it may be. But I'm just going to focus on sports right now. But when you are in sports, there's this leadership that you gain, the skill of leadership, the skill of teamwork, and that skill and leadership leads into adult life. And it's not just in sports. It could be in home life, it could be socially, business, politically, whatever you choose to use it. But we need to let women and girls rise to their full potential for this leadership. And it's not taking away anything from anybody else. It's just about equality. And I don't understand why equality is so hard of an ask. It shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that difficult.
Interesting. The other question I have for you is, what can companies and parents and everyday consumers do to push back against gender stereotypes and advocate for healthier, more empowering products for kids?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I would say is, boy, as a parent, if you don't want the product, don't buy it. If you don't like the product, don't buy it. I
Mm.
mean, companies really listen. They're obviously going to listen. If you don't spend money on their products, it's going to go away.
Yeah.
So, be very careful about what products you bring into your home. If you don't like it, don't buy it. Another thing is to point out stereotypes and gender inequalities with your children so they recognize these as they go through life. That is very, very important to point them out. With businesses, corporations, keep working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. For a couple of years I was a DEI consultant, and it is very frowned upon to say, I need a woman for this spot, right? It's like, no, you just want to have the best candidates for this spot, and then you choose the best person for that spot. You never want to check that box that say, I need, a person of color, I need a woman, right? You want to have diversity, yes, in your business, but you want to make sure you're including them in the hiring process, and not just having that homogenous table. So I always think that the company should represent the people it is appealing to.
Interesting. The because you mentioned something really interesting is you talked about equality and then you talked about meritocracy, and so one of the, I'm sure a lot of the listeners or viewers, they're asking, like, because a lot of I've seen that a lot of people, they use DEI as the guise to come to power and abuse it, like for their own. I mean, obviously there's social benefits, but again, it's been misused in a lot of instances. So how do you you were talking about check boxes and quotas, and so how do you balance this idea of meritocracy? Like, what if the best candidates are, or what if the best candidates are not women or minorities? What if they're like, how do you respond to that?
Well, I would say you do want that best candidate for that job. And I can't imagine that every job, the best candidate isn't going to be a woman or a person of color at all. So if as you're going through the hiring process, yes, it's a diverse landscape. It's not just, like I said, a homogenous.
Yeah.
I mean, now, you know, I mean, any company can do, whatever they want. They don't have to, but we have
Mm.
to recognize that the starting line is different for people and the road is longer for people. It's not, there are some people that open the door and that, yellow brick road is right there, and other people don't even know it exists. So we have to realize that there is inequity in our culture. And, not everybody gets the same starting line. It's ridiculous to think that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's one of the problems with a capitalist society is,
Mm-hmm.
if you are, I mean, if you are not of a Caucasian origin or descent, you're usually starting behind.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of these programs, they trying to help the, people, kind of get a, so that, there's, I mean, whether you call it fair or equal opportunity. But again, there's the idea of capitalism and meritocracy. What did the other, so what, if there was one thing that people wanted, if you wanted the listeners or viewers to walk away with one message, what do you hope that would be, and how can they contact you and check it out and connect with you?
Yeah, yeah. LinkedIn is always a good way. You can go to my website and shoot me an email if you'd like, or I write on Substack, buy my book. One thing that I'd love for people to take away from my book is to believe in yourself and to believe in your gut. I do believe humans have a really strong instinct on what's right and wrong. I you know, there we need to be good to everybody. We want to everybody to have as much success as they can have. And
Hmm.
when it comes into a business sense, if somebody is starting their own business or if somebody is wanting to write a book, I definitely say, use my book as a blueprint, because it's not hard. It's not easy. It's incredibly hard. But writing down all your ideas and getting your marketing plan in place, and knowing that you are going to have these roadblocks, and that, you just can't view them as ultimate stops. You just have to figure out, how do I get around this one?
Mhm.
And I do believe that the way I was successful is I asked a lot of questions. I called a lot of people. I picked up the phone. If somebody didn't have the right answer for me, or they didn't know the answer to what I was asking, I would always ask, do you know who could help me?
Mm.
So it's just asking those questions. And when it comes to writing a book, I believe so many people have stories that need to be heard. Write it down, because you have a team when you're writing a book. It's just not you. You're going to have editors. You're going, if you go the agent route, the publisher route, there is a team that works on your book to get it out there, your story. And there are so many stories that need to be heard.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. We do have one question from the audience chiming in, and their question is, how do you address the idea of reverse discrimination with DEI? I'm just curious to hear their take.
Well, it's really interesting. In DEI, there's no such thing as reverse discrimination, right? Discrimination is discrimination. So I would start there. It's just, discrimination is discrimination, no matter who you are. So yeah, I would just say, maybe just rephrase that to be just discrimination. If you're feeling discriminated against, you probably are. So, or it's something to look into or ask somebody about.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation and just fresh perspective. And again, this idea is, talking about big social cultural change, which we are experiencing right now. And so thanks so much for coming on, and great conversation.
Yes, thanks for having me.